My 3 ex-wives knocked on my door the night before my wedding, and standing on that porch at midnight, all 3 of them together, were the last people on earth I ever expected to see again. I'm Daniel, 58 years old, and in less than 12 hours I was supposed to marry Hannah, the kindest woman I'd ever known. The woman everyone said had finally given me my happy ending. 3 marriages, 3 goodbyes, 3 women I'd spent years trying to forget. But somehow they'd found each other, and somehow they'd driven through the night to reach me before sunrise. I thought they'd come to ruin everything. I poured them coffee with shaking hands, certain they were here to drag up old wounds, old blame, old ghosts I'd buried so deep I'd convinced myself they were gone. But what they told me in that kitchen wasn't about jealousy, and it wasn't about Hannah at all. It was about me, the man I'd been to each of them, the truth not one of them had ever dared to say out loud until tonight. And by the time the sun came up, I had already picked up the phone to call off my own wedding. Why would the 3 women who had every reason to hate me risk everything to save me? What did they know about the man I was about to become that I couldn't see myself? And what could possibly be so devastating that I'd walk away from the best thing that ever happened to me? The night before I married her. The knock had been soft. Barely 3 taps against the wood of my front door. Almost apologetic, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to be there at all. I had a baseball game playing low in the background. A glass of whiskey sat half-finished on the coffee table, the ice long melted, the amber now room temperature and faintly bitter. My wedding suit was already hanging on the back of the bedroom door, still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic, catching a thin strip of hallway light every time I walked past, which I had been doing for 2 hours, because sleep had decided it wasn't coming tonight. Tomorrow was supposed to be the greatest day of my life. I almost didn't answer, but something shifted in the room the moment I heard those 3 taps. A stillness. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like a warning. I set down the glass. I walked to the door. I pulled it open, and the air left my body. Sandra was standing on the left side of the porch. 54 now. Her dark hair cut shorter than the last time I'd seen her. Silver threaded through it in a way that made her look younger, not older. She had her hands folded in front of her, very still, very deliberate, the way she always held herself when she was carrying something heavy, but refusing to let it show. Renee stood in the middle, 57. Spine straight, chin level, the kind of woman who had always walked through pain, the same way she walked through everything else, without flinching, without asking anyone to slow down for her. But her eyes were red. Not from tonight. From all the nights before this one, nights I had not been there for. And Diane stood on the right, the most recent, the wound that still hadn't fully closed, even after 4 years. She looked at me without anger, without coldness, with something far harder to face than either of those things. She looked at me the way you look at a puzzle you still haven't solved, someone you loved deeply enough to keep trying to understand even after the understanding came too late. 3 women, 3 marriages, 3 chapters of a life I thought I'd already closed. Standing on my porch at midnight, the night before I married someone else. Not one of them spoke. The porch light buzzed softly above them. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. The October air was cool and carried the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet, something restless and waiting, like the whole night was holding its breath. I was the one who broke first. "Come in," I said. Because what else do you say? What does your brain produce when the 3 most defining relationships of your life are standing shoulder to shoulder at your front door at midnight? They came in, one by one, quietly. No drama, no entrance. Just 3 women who had clearly made their decision long before they knocked, and were simply, calmly, seeing it through. Sandra's perfume hit me as she passed. Something light and unchanged. The exact same scent she'd worn at 22. A detail my memory had held without my permission for 30 years. Renee gave me a small nod as she crossed the threshold, controlled and deliberate. Diane was last. She touched the doorframe lightly as she came in, a small, almost unconscious gesture, and something about it tightened in my throat. I went to the kitchen. Because making coffee is what you do when the world has stopped making sense. Because boiling water and measuring grounds is something the hands can do, while the mind tries desperately to catch up. I pulled 4 mugs from the cabinet. My hands were shaking. Not obviously, Not dramatically, but shaking the way they do when you're holding something back with every muscle you have. One mug clipped the counter edge, and I caught it fast and stood there for just a moment with both hands wrapped around it, staring at the wall, breathing through my nose. Behind me, chairs scraped softly against the kitchen floor. They sat down at my table. I poured the coffee. I brought the mugs over. I sat down across from them, like a man sitting across from a jury. Not cruel, not punishing, but final. "I know what you think," I said before any of them could open their mouths. "You came to stop the wedding." Sandra shook her head gently. "We didn't." "Then I want to understand two things." I set my mug down. "How do three of my ex-wives end up in the same car, driving to my house at midnight, and why tonight?" Another look passed between them. 3 seconds, a whole conversation compressed into a glance. And in that exchange was something that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. A comfort, a closeness, a shorthand that only comes from real time spent together. Real trust, built from the ground up. These three women had a relationship, with each other, that I had known absolutely nothing about. 2 years ago, Renee said, wrapping both hands around her mug, Sandra recognized me from an old photograph. A photo she'd seen in a box she was finally cleaning out. Same city, same conference. We happened to be 2 tables apart in the same coffee shop. She walked over. She paused. We talked for 6 hours. 6 hours. And then she called Diane, Sandra said, picking up the thread without missing a beat. And 2 months later, the three of us sat in a hotel room in Phoenix, until 2 in the morning, talking. She held my gaze. Really talking. "About me," I said flatly. "About ourselves," Diane said. "What we'd carried. What we'd never said. What we'd spent years trying to make sense of alone." She looked at me evenly. "You were the subject, but we were the story." The clock on the wall ticked. I looked down at my coffee. Through the half-open bedroom door, I could see the hem of the dry cleaning bag moving faintly in the air from the heating vent. My suit. Hannah's face moved through my mind. Her laugh, the warmth of her hand in mine, the way she looked at me like I was something worth believing in. "Daniel." Sandra's voice was soft, but underneath the softness was a weight that pressed. "We are not here to hurt you. We are not here to take anything from you. We're here because Hannah is a good woman, and because you are about to do to her what you did to each of us. And this time, we are the only people on this earth in a position to stop it." Something hot moved through my chest. I'm not the same man I was. I have learned from every one of those marriages, every mistake. "You learned the surface things," Sandra said quietly. "You learned to say the right words, to listen better, to make the right gestures at the right moments. You got very good at the performance of love." She paused. "But you never went underneath, Daniel. Not once. In 30 years, you never went underneath." I started to respond. "Can I ask you something first?" she said. I waited. "The night you proposed to me, do you remember what you said?" I looked away. I remembered. "You said, Sandra, I have been waiting my whole life to finally feel like enough." She said it softly, like reading from something she'd held memorized for decades. I thought it was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. But I was 22, and I didn't understand what you were actually telling me. You weren't saying you loved me. You were saying you needed me to complete something inside you that you hadn't finished yourself. That love, for you, was about what it gave you, not what you could build together. The room was very quiet. "I loved you," I said. "I know you did," she said immediately. "Daniel, I know that. But love isn't the question. The question is, what were you trying to fix? And when I couldn't fix it, when being someone's entire emotional foundation became too heavy, I left. And I let you believe it was about compatibility, about growing in different directions." Her eyes dropped to the table. "Because I didn't have the language for this back then. I've had a long time to find it." I turned to Renee. She was watching me the way she always watched hard things, squarely, without flinching. "You and I started." "Don't," she said. "Not unkind, just firm. Don't summarize it. Don't manage it. Just listen." I closed my mouth. "Do you know what I thought about on the drive here tonight?" she said. "I thought about the nursery, the blue curtains we picked out together, the little wooden name we had carved above the crib." She stopped. Her jaw moved slightly. the way it did when she was refusing to let something rise to the surface. I thought about sitting on the floor of that room, alone, 3 weeks after we lost him, 6 hours on that floor. And then I heard your car in the driveway, and you came in, and you kissed my forehead, and you said we're going to be okay. And then you went and showered and went to sleep. The kitchen felt airless, and I didn't know how to be there, I said. My voice came out rough and stripped of everything. I know, she said. But Daniel, I needed you to not know how. Together. I needed you to be broken right next to me. Just once. Just for one night. I needed you to stop being strong, and just fall apart the way I was falling apart. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes finally glistened. But you were in that office 10 days after we buried our son. 10 days, and everyone thought you were so strong, and I was alone in that house, coming apart room by room. She let out a slow breath. You ran. You called it responsibility. But you ran from the one moment in our marriage that needed you most. I had nothing. Not a single defense that could survive the truth of what she'd just said. I know, I said. It came out barely above a whisper. I know you know, she said. That's exactly the point. I looked at Diane. She had been patient through all of it. The kind of patience that comes from carrying something a long time and deciding the carrying was worth it. I've probably already told myself some version of whatever you're about to say, I told her. Then you'll recognize it, she said simply. I nodded. She leaned forward slightly. Daniel, I stayed longer than either of them. Not because I was stronger, because I was more stubborn, because I believed, genuinely, fully believed, that there was a man inside you capable of real intimacy. Not the performed kind, not the flowers and the right words kind. The real kind, the terrifying kind. The kind where you let someone see you when you're ashamed, when you're lost, when you don't have the answer. Her eyes held mine without wavering. Do you know why I finally left? I told myself it was because I moved too fast. Proposed before you were ready. That I overwhelmed. No, she said. I stopped. I left, she said slowly. Because the night I told you I was scared. Really scared. About us. About whether you truly saw me. You fixed it. You came home with flowers. You planned a weekend away. You said everything perfectly. She paused. And I sat there watching you perform love at me. And I realized something that broke my heart completely. Her voice dropped. You had no idea you were performing. You genuinely believed that was what love looked like. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because it meant you'd been performing it for so long that you couldn't feel the difference anymore. And the man Hannah is marrying tomorrow. He still can't. The room went absolutely still. I stared at the table, at the grain of the wood, at the 4 mugs of coffee, 3 of them untouched, at the thin strip of light coming from the bedroom where my suit hung waiting. And then I sat with what she'd said, really sat with it. Not deflecting, not editing, not reaching for the polished version. Just sitting with it, the way you sit with something that has been true for a very long time, and finally has a name. Because she was right. Not in a vague, abstract, maybe possibly way. In a specific, surgical, undeniable way that reached back 30 years and touched every room of every marriage I had ever had, and every moment I'd mistaken motion for closeness, gesture for vulnerability, words for the actual broken open truth. I stood up from the table. I walked to the window. The street outside was dark and still, orange pools of streetlight on empty asphalt. The whole neighborhood sleeping peacefully, unbothered by the fact that my entire understanding of myself was quietly coming apart in a kitchen at 1 in the morning. I stood there for a long time, and then I asked the question I was most afraid to ask. If everything you're saying is true, I said without turning around, what am I supposed to do with it? It's 1 in the morning. Hannah is asleep 10 minutes from here. Her family flew in today. There are flowers in the church. There is a cake. There is a dress. I turned to face them. What do you actually want me to do? The 3 women looked at each other. Something passed between them. The final exchange. The one they had clearly rehearsed and dreaded in equal measure. And then Sandra looked at me, and she said something. Quietly. Directly. 8 words. 8 words that I was completely unprepared for. Not because they were cruel, but because they were the most honest, most loving, most devastating thing anyone had ever said to me in my entire life. I stood there and I felt something shift. Deep down. Underneath everything. Underneath 58 years of running and performing and building walls so smooth and high that I'd started calling them character. I felt it shift, and I reached for my phone. The phone felt heavier than it had any right to feel. Just a rectangle of glass and metal, something I carried in my pocket every single day without thinking. But standing there in that kitchen, with 3 women watching me from the table and my wedding suit hanging in the next room and the clock reading 1:17 in the morning, it felt like it weighed everything I had ever refused to carry. I scrolled to Hannah's name. Her contact photo was from the summer, a picture I'd taken on the dock of her sister's lake house upstate. She was laughing at something just off camera, head tilted back, eyes almost closed, completely unguarded, completely herself. I had looked at that photo probably 100 times in the last 4 months, and every time it made something warm open up in my chest. That particular happiness that comes from looking at someone and knowing they have chosen you. I stared at it now, and the warmth was still there. But underneath it, something else had cracked open. Something cold and necessary and long overdue. Sandra, Renee, and Diane had gone quiet. No one was pushing. No one was watching me with pressure in their eyes. They had said what they came to say, and now the room belonged entirely to me. To whatever I was or wasn't going to do with it. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I was almost hoping for voicemail. Almost. Then she picked up. Daniel. Her voice was thick with sleep, slightly alarmed, the way anyone's voice sounds when the phone rings at 1 in the morning, the night before the most important day of their life. What's wrong? Are you okay? And the sound of her, the realness of her, the immediate concern in her voice, the way her first instinct at 1 in the morning was worry about me and not herself, broke something in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. Hannah, I said, and then I stopped. Daniel, you're scaring me. What happened? I need to tell you something. My voice was low, stripped of everything performative, everything managed. Just sound, just truth, finding its way out of a throat that had swallowed it for 58 years. And I need you to let me say all of it before you respond. Can you do that? A pause. A short, frightened pause. Yes, she said. I walked out of the kitchen, into the hallway, until I was standing directly underneath my wedding suit. The plastic wrap caught the light. The dark fabric underneath was pressed and perfect and waiting. I have been in love with you, I said slowly. I want you to know that first. I want that to be the first thing. Because everything I'm about to say exists inside that truth, not outside it. She said nothing. She was listening. But I've been in love before, 3 times before, and each of those women, each marriage, ended, for reasons I told myself I understood. Incompatibility, bad timing, grief that got between us. I had a reason for each one. A clean, reasonable, acceptable reason. I pressed my free hand flat against the wall. And tonight, Hannah, all 3 of them are sitting in my kitchen. I heard her breath catch. Together, I said. They came together and they told me something. They told me, in the most honest way anyone has ever spoken to me, that I have never once in my adult life allowed someone to truly see me, that I perform love, that I know exactly how to look like the right man without ever becoming him, and that I have done this to every woman who loved me. I have taken their love and I have used it as a mirror to see a version of myself I wanted to believe in, and I have never, not once, done the terrifying and necessary and real work of becoming that man from the inside. The silence on the other end of the phone was the kind that breathes. And Hannah, my voice broke then, just slightly, at the edge. Hannah, you deserve that man. The real one, not the performance. And I am not him yet. I want to be. God, I want to be. But wanting it is not the same as being it. And I have already made that mistake 3 times, and I cannot, I will not, make it a 4th time with you. For a long moment, nothing. Then Hannah said, very quietly, are you calling off our wedding? 3 seconds of silence that lasted 100 years. Yes, I said. I heard the sound she made. It wasn't a cry, not yet. It was something earlier and quieter than a cry. The sound a person makes in the instant before they understand the full size of what is happening to them. Like the moment before impact. Like the inhale. Hannah, don't. Her voice was very controlled, Very careful. The kind of careful that costs everything. Please don't say my name like that right now. Okay, I said. Another silence. The flowers are already at the church, she said. I know. My mother has been in this city for 3 days. Her voice was still controlled, still level, but something underneath it was trembling, like a fault line under still water. My dress is hanging on the back of my closet door. I know. And you're calling me at 1 in the morning because your ex-wives. She stopped herself. Reset. I could almost hear her pressing her hand flat over her mouth, the way she does when she's fighting for composure. I can't do this right now, she said finally. I can't talk about this right now. I understand, I said. Do you? And for the first time, underneath the control, something sharp edged through. Not rage, not cruelty, just the sound of a person who is choosing, in real time, between their pain and their dignity, and refusing to let the pain win. Do you actually understand, Daniel? Because I don't. I don't understand any of this. I know you don't, I said. And I am so sorry. I am more sorry than I can make sound real right now. But I would rather hurt you tonight than ruin you slowly over the next 10 years. And I know how that sounds. I know how easy it is for that to sound like a justification, like something a selfish man says to make a selfish choice feel noble. But Hannah, it's not. I promise you it's not. She was quiet for a moment. I need to go, she said. Okay, don't call me again tonight. I won't. The line went dead. I stood in the hallway with the phone in my hand, and the call ended, and the silence of the house pressing in from every wall. After a moment, I reached up and unhooked the wedding suit from the back of the door, still in its plastic, still perfect and pressed and waiting for a morning that was no longer coming. I set it down on the bed, carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure what to do with it, but you know it deserves to be handled with care. Then I walked back to the kitchen. Sandra, Renee, and Diane were still there, still sitting, still quiet. I called her, I said. Unnecessary. They had heard enough to know. No one said anything for a moment. Then Renee said, "Are you okay?" And something about the question, the ordinary human simplicity of it, coming from this woman, in this kitchen, at this hour, loosened something in my chest that I'd been holding rigid for 30 years. My eyes burned. I sat down in the chair hard, both hands over my face, and I breathed through it, the way you breathe through something enormous, slowly, carefully, like you're trying not to disturb the full size of it. I didn't fall apart. I didn't sob or collapse, but I let the weight of it be the weight of it, and I did not immediately reach for something to cover it with. And for me, for the man Sandra had described, the man who ran to the office 10 days after his son was buried, the man who had turned grief and fear into productivity and performance his entire life, that was something. That was new. She didn't deserve this, I said, through my hands. No, Sandra said. She didn't. But you did the right thing, Diane said, and her voice was not comforting in the soft, cushioning way. It was certain, the way someone speaks when they believe something fully. Did I? I dropped my hands. Looked at the three of them. Because from where I'm sitting, I've just destroyed a woman's wedding day. Her family is here. Her dress is hung, and I called her at 1 in the morning because my ex-wives told me I have emotional intimacy problems. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment. How is that the right thing? Because the alternative, Renee said steadily, is what happened to each of us. A year in, or 5 years in, or 8 years in, you pull away, you go through the motions, you stop being present in any real way, and slowly, quietly, you hollow out a person who deserved a whole life. She held my gaze. We're not asking you to believe it was painless. We're asking you to believe it was necessary. The clock on the wall said 1:44. I looked at the three of them. Really looked. Sandra, who had loved me at 22, with the whole unguarded fullness of a person who didn't know enough yet to protect themselves. Renee, who had sat on the floor of a nursery for 6 hours waiting for me to fall apart beside her, and waited alone. Diane, who had watched me perform love at her for 2 years and finally understood that the performance was not a choice, it was all I knew how to give. These 3 women, who had every scar I'd left on them, pressed somewhere still beneath the surface, who had every right to hate me, resent me, avoid the very syllables of my name, who had, instead, found each other, built something between them that I hadn't earned, and then used that something to drive through the night and sit in my kitchen and tell me the hardest truth anyone had ever handed me. Why? I said, and the word came out differently than it had before. Not like a challenge, not like a deflection, like a genuine, open, wondering question. Why would you do this? Why do any of you still care? Sandra looked down at her mug. Because we spent years being angry, she said. And anger is exhausting. And at some point you get tired of carrying something that heavy, and you have to decide what to put down and what to hold on to. She looked up. We put down the anger, but we couldn't put down who you were, underneath all of it. Because underneath all of it, Daniel, you are a good man. You are a genuinely, deeply good man who never got the tools to be a present one. She paused. And none of us wanted to watch you do this one more time and know we could have stopped it. I couldn't speak. We didn't do this for you, Diane said gently. We did it for Hannah, and for ourselves, so that we could look in the mirror and know we said it. But we also did it for you, Renee said, and she reached across the table and put her hand on the back of mine. Not in a romantic way, nothing like that, in the simple human way of one person steadying another. We also did it for you. I looked down at her hand. I didn't move away, and then Sandra said, 8 words. I looked up. She held my gaze. Quiet, clear. The same woman who had stood at an altar with me at 23, and believed with every cell of her being that she was the answer to my longing. You are not broken, she said. You are just unfinished. 8 words. I sat with them. I let them in through all the places I normally would have sealed them out, and something shifted. Not dramatically, not like lightning or revelation, but the way a room shifts when someone finally opens a window that's been painted shut for decades. Small, real, terrifying in the best possible way. Around 3 a.m., they started to gather their things. Quietly, without ceremony. Renee zipped her jacket. Diane found her keys on the counter where she'd set them when they came in. Sandra stood up and brought her mug to the sink and rinsed it. A small domestic gesture so ordinary in this extraordinary night that it nearly undid me. I walked them to the door. We stood on the porch together. The October night around us cold and clean. The rain that had been threatening all evening finally beginning to fall. Soft and light, barely more than mist. The kind that you feel before you hear it. The streetlights threw their orange circles onto wet asphalt, and the whole neighborhood smelled like earth and cold air, and the very beginning of something. I didn't know what to say. Don't call her tonight, Diane said. Let her have the night. I know. And Daniel. Renee stopped at the top of the porch steps and turned back. Her voice was even and direct as it had always been. The voice of a woman who had spent her whole life refusing to dress the truth up in anything softer than it was. Get help. Not in 6 months. Not after you feel better. Now. Tomorrow. A real therapist who specializes in this. Someone who will go underneath with you. She held my gaze. Promise me that. I promise. She nodded. Once, then she turned and walked down the steps. Sandra was last. She stopped in front of me on the porch and looked at me for a moment. The long, knowing look of someone who has known you at your youngest and your most unguarded. She put one hand briefly against the side of my face. Just for a second. Warm and steady and full of something that took 30 years to become uncomplicated enough to offer freely. You were always worth saving, she said. You just never believed it. Then she turned and walked down the steps, and the 3 of them crossed the dark, rain-misted street to where the car was parked. They got in without looking back. The headlights came on, and then they were gone. 3 red taillights disappearing slowly around the corner until there was nothing left but the wet street and the sound of rain and the house behind me, full of flowers I'd bought for tomorrow. I stood on the porch for a long time. I thought about Hannah, her face when she laughs, the way she falls asleep reading, always with one hand still holding the book, as if she refused to entirely surrender to unconsciousness. The way she made me feel when I was with her, like a man at the very beginning of something, instead of the end. I thought about the nursery with the blue curtains. I thought about Sandra at 22, saying yes at an altar, thinking she was the answer to a question she hadn't been told the real words to. I thought about every room I had walked out of, when the emotion inside it got too big. I thought about 58 years of being called strong by people who didn't know that my strength was actually just fear, wearing a very good suit, and standing there in the rain on the porch of a house full of wedding flowers, the night before a wedding that wasn't happening anymore. I did something I could not remember ever doing in my adult life. I stopped moving. I stopped managing. I stopped reaching for the next thing, the next action, the next plan that would keep me one step ahead of whatever feeling was chasing me. I just stood there, and I let the rain fall on me. And for the first time in 58 years, I didn't know what came next. And I didn't immediately try to fix that. I just let it be true. I let the not knowing be the thing I was standing inside of, instead of running from it or building something over it, or calling it by a more manageable name. I stood there until I was cold, until my shirt was damp and my feet were wet, and the rain had worked its way into everything. Then I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table in the dark, in the 4 chairs that still held the shapes of where we'd all been sitting. I picked up my phone, not to call Hannah, I had promised, but to open the search bar, to type, slowly, carefully, with the deliberate purpose of a man beginning something he is scared of, and choosing to begin it anyway. I typed, therapist specializing in emotional avoidance and intimacy. 12 results loaded. I didn't close the phone. I started to read. The morning the wedding was supposed to happen, I woke up at 6:45, not because of an alarm. There was no alarm set. I had canceled it the night before, somewhere between reading therapist bios and watching the rain against the window glass. I woke up because my body had been programmed for this day for months. Because somewhere underneath consciousness, something in me had been counting down, and now the countdown had reached 0, and the day was here, and the day was empty, and I was still in yesterday's clothes, and the house smelled like coffee, and the ghost of 3 women who had told me the truth about myself, and left me standing in the rain. I lay still for a moment. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. Outside, birds were going about their morning without any awareness of the particular devastation occurring in this particular house. Somewhere in this city, Hannah was waking up in a hotel room with her mother and her sister, and the first thought that entered her mind would be the shape of what she had lost. I knew that. I held it. I didn't try to move it to somewhere more comfortable. I sat up. I went to the window. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn and left the world clean and wet and silver, the trees still dripping, the street below catching light in its puddles and throwing it back in fractured pieces. It was a beautiful morning. That felt unfair. Beautiful mornings have no business happening on the days when you have broken something important. I picked up my phone. There was a text from Diane, sent at 5:47 a.m. We got home safe. How are you? 3 words that required almost nothing from the sender, and somehow meant everything to the receiver. I typed back, still here, starting to read. I meant the therapist results, but I realized as I sent it that it was true in a larger way than that. Still here, present in the room, present in the pain, not yet running toward the next thing, the next chapter, the next version of myself that might feel better faster. Just still here. Her response came within 60 seconds, a single word. Good. I showered. I called the church. I called the caterer. I called the florist. Each call was its own small surgical act of dismantling. Calm, necessary, deeply uncomfortable. The kind of conversation where you can hear the disbelief in the other person's voice, and you have to sit inside that disbelief and not explain your way out of it, because there is no explanation that fits inside a phone call. I didn't say my ex-wives came to my door. I didn't say I had an emotional reckoning in a midnight kitchen. I said the wedding was canceled. I said I was sorry for the inconvenience. I said yes. I understood there were costs that were non-refundable, and yes, that was entirely fair. Then I called the therapist. Her name was Dr. Carol Sims. Her website had been the 3rd result in the search. Something in the way her bio was written had stopped my scrolling. Not because it was polished or impressive, but because it was honest in the specific, unglamorous way of someone who has sat with real pain long enough to stop being afraid of it. She specialized in attachment disorders, emotional avoidance, and what she called relational repetition patterns, the way human beings unconsciously recreate the same emotional dynamic in relationship after relationship, always hoping for a different result. always wondering why the result stays the same. I left a voicemail at 6:58 in the morning. I told her my name. I told her I had just called off my wedding. I told her I needed to see someone as soon as possible because I had just been told something true about myself, that I did not have the tools to hold alone. And I was terrified that if I waited too long, I would find a way to convince myself it wasn't true. She called me back at 9:15. We met Thursday. That first session, I sat in a chair that was comfortable, in the deliberate, intentional way of a chair chosen to tell your nervous system that it was safe to be here. Dr. Sims sat across from me, unhurried, a small notepad on her knee that she barely looked at. She was 60 or so, with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair, and she had the particular quality of stillness that you only develop from spending decades in rooms with people who are carrying things they have never said out loud. She didn't rush me. She didn't fill silence. She let silence be a room we could both sit inside without immediately redecorating it. I told her everything, not in the polished, summarized way I was accustomed to telling things, not in the version that made me sound like a man who had figured it out and was simply reporting back. I told it the way it actually was, with the gaps and the ugliness and the moments of selfishness that I had spent years reclassifying as strength. I told her about Sandra at 22. I told her about the nursery and the blue curtains and the floor where Renee had sat alone for 6 hours. I told her about Diane, watching me perform love, and finally understanding that I didn't know I was performing. I told her about Hannah's voice at 1 in the morning, the sound she made before the cry, the inhale before impact. Dr. Sims listened to all of it. Then she said, "Daniel, what did love feel like in your house when you were growing up?" And the question reached into a room I had sealed 40 years ago and turned on a light. I won't give you every session. There were many, weeks of them, then months. But I will tell you what slowly became clear. The thing that sat at the center of everything. The thing all 3 ex-wives had been circling from the outside, without the clinical language to name it precisely. My father had been a man who expressed love through provision and performance, never presence. He worked, he provided, he showed up at the important events. But emotional availability was not something he had been taught to offer, and so he did not offer it. And because children learn love by being loved, I grew up understanding love as a series of correct actions rather than a state of genuine connection. I learned that if you did the right things, brought the flowers, said the right words, planned the right weekend, you had loved. You had fulfilled the contract. You were done. The terrifying part was that I had done this with complete sincerity. Every single time. I had never been performing with malice. I had been performing because I genuinely did not know the difference between the performance and the thing itself. Dr. Sims, in our 4th session, said something that rearranged my interior architecture in ways I am still discovering. She said, "The goal isn't to stop being the man who does loving things. The goal is to become the man who can sit in a room with someone he loves when there is nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to give, and simply be there, fully, without flinching, without running toward productivity or planning or the next thing." Real intimacy, Daniel, is not built in the beautiful moments. It's built in the ordinary ones where you choose to stay present when staying present is uncomfortable. I wrote it down that night, on actual paper with a pen, the way you write things you need your hands to hold. I put it on the refrigerator. I looked at it every morning. 3 months passed. In those 3 months, I did not contact Hannah, not once. I had promised I wouldn't, not to her directly, but to myself, in the private language of a man who was finally starting to learn the difference between what he wanted and what was right. She needed time. She needed the space of her grief without me standing at the edge of it, needing to manage her forgiveness, needing to know I was forgiven so that I could feel better. That need, the need to be forgiven quickly so the discomfort would end, I recognized it now for what it was. Another form of taking. Another way the self protects itself at another person's expense. So I stayed away. But something unexpected had begun to grow in the space where the chaos used to live. Sandra, Renee, and Diane, whether by accident or by design or by the particular grace of people who have already done the hard work of choosing each other, stayed. Not every day, Not in the way of new friends who overcorrect with intensity. In the quiet, easy, unhurried way of people who have already established that they are not going anywhere. Sandra called on Sunday mornings. We talked about everything and nothing. Her job, a book she was reading, something funny that happened on her walk. Renee texted practical things with the directness that had always been her native language. Did you go this week? Good. Keep going. And once, when I told her the session had been particularly hard, she texted back, hard means it's working. Diane and I met for lunch once a month, at a quiet Italian place not far from her apartment. We had figured out, in the strange alchemy of all of this, that we were actually quite good at being honest with each other, now that honesty wasn't weighted down by the daily work of a marriage. We talked like two people who had survived something together and were still figuring out what to make of the surviving. I told Dr. Sims about the three of them, about how it had developed. She smiled, the quiet, knowing smile of someone who is not surprised by the resilience and complexity of human beings, but who still delights in it. What do you think they gave each other? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. The same thing, I said. They gave each other the same thing. They each had a piece of the story that the others didn't have. And putting the pieces together didn't just give them a picture of me. It gave them a picture of themselves, of what they'd survived, of what they were worth. Dr. Sims nodded slowly. And what did they give you? I looked out the window of her office. The bare November branches against a white sky. Evidence, I said. They gave me evidence that it was possible to be known, really known, in the unflattering and specific way, and still be cared for. That the truth about yourself doesn't have to destroy the people who discover it. That love, the real kind, can survive honesty. She wrote something in her notepad. Hold on to that, she said. 6 months after the night of the knock. On a Thursday in April, the kind of afternoon that feels like permission, all new green and clear sky and the particular quality of light that only exists in early spring, I was walking through the farmer's market near my apartment. Something I had started doing on Thursdays as part of the ordinary, grounding, quietly revolutionary practice of being present in small moments. When I turned a corner between the bread stall and the flower vendor and walked directly into Hannah, we both stopped. She was holding a paper bag in one arm and a bunch of yellow tulips in the other hand, and she was wearing a gray coat I hadn't seen before, and her hair was slightly longer than it had been in October, and she looked like herself, fully, completely herself. Not the diminished, shattered version I had feared she might be. Not performing wellness to hide damage. She looked like a woman who had been through something hard and had come out the other side of it, carrying something different, but not broken. She looked at me. I looked at her. For 3 full seconds, neither of us spoke. Around us the market moved. A child laughed somewhere behind me. Someone called out a price, the smell of fresh bread and early spring flowers moving through the cold air between us. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. We stood there. Are you okay? I asked. And then immediately, I'm sorry, that's probably not a fair question. It's a fair question, she said. She adjusted the tulips in her arm. I'm okay. She looked briefly at something in the middle distance and then back at me. I've been doing the work of being okay. Which is different, but it gets you to the same place eventually. I know, I said. I've been doing that too. I heard, she said. I looked at her. Diane told me, she said simply. Of course Diane had found her. Of course those women, those 3 extraordinary, complicated, honest women, had not left Hannah's side of the story untended either. Something tightened in my throat that was not quite sadness and not quite relief, but existed in that country between them. Hannah, I started. You don't have to, she said. I want to. She waited. I am sorry, I said. Not in the fast way. Not in the way designed to get to forgiveness faster so I can feel better. In the slow way. In the way that has been sitting with what it means. For 6 months, in therapy, in every honest conversation I have had with 3 women who deserved more from me than I gave them. In that way, I am sorry. She looked at me for a long time. Daniel, she said. I know. She shifted the bag on her arm. I was angry. I was devastated. For about 2 months I was both of those things at a volume I didn't know I was capable of. She paused. And then Diane called me. And she told me the whole story. The real story. Not the one in the morning version where all I had was the shock and the pain. She told me everything. The kitchen. What they said. What it cost you to hear it. I didn't speak, and I still had to be angry for a while after that, she said. Because understanding something doesn't make it stop hurting. But I was angry at the right thing eventually. Not at you. At the situation. At the years of damage that got carried forward into the space where we were trying to build something. She looked at the tulips in her arm. I went to therapy too. I'm glad, I said. Me too. She looked up. It turns out I have some patterns of my own to look at. Turns out I tend to choose men who need saving because it lets me avoid being seen myself. She said it with the clear-eyed, unsentimental honesty of someone who has already cried about it and arrived at the other side. So we were quite a pair. Something lightened between us. Not laughter exactly, but the thing that lives next door to laughter. The thing that can only exist between people who have been honest enough with each other that nothing has to be held up anymore. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. Is there anything left for you after everything? Is there anything there that isn't just damage? She was quiet for a moment. A long moment. The kind of moment you don't rush because what's in it is real and deserves its full measure of time. I think, she said carefully, that there is something there that was always real. I think we were real, Daniel. I think the connection was real. I think the love was real. She held my eyes steadily. But I also think that real isn't always enough on its own. Real has to be accompanied by ready. And we weren't ready. You weren't ready. And maybe I wasn't either. Not fully. Not in the ways I was pretending not to see. And now? I said. She looked at me. Now, she said slowly, I think I would like to get a cup of coffee. Just coffee. Not a declaration, not a plan, not a beginning or an ending. Just two people who have both been doing the hard work of becoming more honest. Getting a cup of coffee in the middle of a Thursday at a farmer's market, like normal people, and talking. Yes, I said, without hesitating. And then, yes. We found a small cafe at the edge of the market. We sat across from each other at a table by the window, and the afternoon light came through in long, pale strips and made everything look like a painting of itself. We ordered coffee. We talked. We talked for 2 hours. Not about us, not about October, not about what came next. We talked about books and the changing neighborhood and what therapy had surfaced that surprised us most, and what it felt like to finally recognize a pattern in yourself that you'd been living inside for years without being able to name it. We talked like two people who had already survived the worst of each other and discovered, on the other side, that there was something genuine still breathing. At some point, Hannah said, "Tell me something you couldn't have told me a year ago." I held my coffee mug with both hands. Thought about it genuinely rather than reaching for the polished version. "That I'm scared," I said. Consistently. Underneath the confidence and the competence and all of it, I am a man who is almost always scared. Of being truly seen and found lacking. Of love that requires me to be present in the uncomfortable moments, rather than useful in the easy ones. Of grief. Of my own grief specifically, which I spent 30 years outsourcing into productivity. I looked at her across the table. I couldn't have told you that a year ago, because I didn't know it was true. And the part I really couldn't have told you, the part that still takes effort to say without dressing it up, is that I needed someone to see me scared and stay, and I never let anyone close enough to try. Hannah looked at me across the table in the thin April light, and I let her look. I didn't manage the moment. I didn't deflect or pivot or soften the exposure with a joke or a gesture. I sat inside her, looking at me, and I let it be what it was. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard you say," she said. "It's the truest," I said. She smiled. Small. Real. The smile from the doc photograph. We did not leave that cafe with promises. We did not leave with plans or declarations or a roadmap for what came next. We left with something more durable and more honest than any of those things. We left with the quiet, unhurried understanding of two people who had each done the real work and arrived, separately, at a place where something genuine was possible. We walked out into the April afternoon, and the market was winding down around us, and the yellow tulips Hannah had bought were still in the crook of her arm. And the light was doing that particular thing it does in early spring, where everything looks like it is being offered back to the world after a long winter. We stood on the sidewalk. She turned one direction, I turned the other. "Same time next week?" she said. "Same time next week?" I said. That was how it started again. Not with a proposal, not with a performance, not with a grand gesture, or a speech, or a weekend plan to look like the right answer to a question she hadn't asked. It started with a cup of coffee and 2 hours of honest conversation and the willingness to show up again the following Thursday without knowing exactly where it was going, and to let that unknowing be okay. Over the months that followed, we built something I had never built before. Not because the feeling was stronger, though it was, in the particular unshowy way that real things are stronger than beautiful things. We built something different because we built it differently. We built it with the lights on. We built it with the windows open. We built it in the moments of discomfort and the ordinary Tuesday evenings, and the small misunderstandings we actually sat with, instead of smoothing over, and the grief we shared when her father was hospitalized in September, and I drove 2 hours in the rain to sit with her, in a hospital waiting room, and did not once reach for my phone, or look for the exit, or offer productivity as a substitute for presence. I just sat there, with her, in the room, in the not knowing. And that, Dr. Sims told me later when I described it, was the whole thing. That was the entire work of a year, compressed into one cold hospital waiting room. The willingness to stay fully present inside a moment you cannot fix, or improve, or exit, because the person next to you needs you to be a human being with them, rather than a solution for them. I am 59 years old now. I am not a finished man. I don't believe in finished men. I believe in men who have decided that becoming is a project worth continuing, who have chosen to treat self-knowledge as an ongoing responsibility rather than a one-time achievement. I still catch myself reaching for performance when presence is what's called for. I still feel the old pull toward productivity when grief enters the room. I still carry the particular instinct of a man who was taught that love is something you demonstrate rather than something you inhabit. But I catch it now. And catching it is everything. Sandra calls on Sunday mornings. We talked last week about a book she's reading on attachment theory. She laughed and said she was probably going to annotate the whole thing. Renee texted last month when she made partner at her firm. Just one line. Finally did the thing. Diane and I had lunch last Tuesday, and she told me she had started dating someone. Quietly, carefully, with her eyes open. And she looked the way a person looks when they are building something real, rather than running from something empty. These 3 women came to my door at midnight and told me the truth I had been running from for 30 years. They did not do it for gratitude. They did not do it for recognition. They did it because love, the real kind, the kind that has survived the worst and come out the other side with its eyes open, sometimes looks like honesty delivered at the hardest possible moment by the last people you would ever expect. They saved my life. Not dramatically. Not in the way of movies where the music swells and the hero is pulled from physical danger at the very last second. They saved it quietly, at a kitchen table, over 4 cups of coffee that went cold, while they said the things that needed to be said. They saved it by refusing to let me walk into my 4th marriage as the same unfinished man I had always been. They saved it by deciding, together, that the truth was more important than their comfort, and that Hannah's future was worth the drive. I did not deserve that, but I have been trying, every day since October, to become the man who does. Some mornings I get up and the first thing I do is look at the piece of paper on the refrigerator, the one I wrote in my own hand on a Thursday night after a therapy session that turned something over in me I had not known was there. Real intimacy is not built in the beautiful moments. It's built in the ordinary ones, where you choose to stay present when staying present is uncomfortable. I make my coffee, I read it, and I start the day. The story of 3 women who knocked on a door at midnight is not about divorce. It is not about wedding drama or romantic jealousy or the complicated wreckage of failed marriages. It is about the radical and terrifying and ultimately beautiful act of being told the truth by people who love you more than they need you to be comfortable. It is about what happens when you stop running. It is about what becomes possible when you finally, fully, stop running. And if you have been carrying something, a pattern you keep repeating, a wound you keep working around, a version of love that looks right but never quite reaches the place where you actually live, then maybe this story was never really mine. Maybe it was yours all along.